Everything has an order. The cosmos, the laws of physics, nature, time. What shapes our universe is this very sense of order. But that order is constantly pushed toward absolute chaos by ever-increasing entropy. So, can we say the same about the Elder Scrolls universe? Is there really a path from order to chaos at work there too? If we say yes, then what do we do with the Daedra? These beings chose to stay outside that order, they didn't take part in the creation of Mundus, and they've become symbols of pure chaos. And their countless interventions in Tamriel show us something important. In the Elder Scrolls universe, order and chaos are two opposing forces, tightly intertwined. Chaos can knock on your door at any moment and leave behind destruction you never saw coming. In a way, the history of Elder Scrolls is also the history of the Daedra interfering in the mortal world. You simply can't separate the Daedra from Elder Scrolls games. And that's exactly why, in the long-awaited Elder Scrolls 6, a game we still wait for despite everything, it seems inevitable that the story of the Daedra will once again collide with our own. In my previous videos, we've made all sorts of predictions and theories about Elder Scrolls 6 by looking at events from past games. But one of the most important parts of this universe, the Daedra, have often been left out of those guesses. And yet, in every Elder Scrolls game, the Daedra play a crucial role in the story. The best example of this is the fourth game in the series, Oblivion. Its entire main story is about Tamriel being invaded by the Daedric Prince of Destruction and Chaos, mehrunesdagon. Another great example, which we'll talk about in more detail later in this video, is Elder Scrolls Online, where the whole main story revolves around molagbal, the Daedric Prince of Domination and Violation, trying to merge Tamriel with his own realm of oblivion. These games also show us something interesting. Even in times when the races of Tamriel are on the brink of war, when everything's falling apart, a Daedric threat is enough to unite even the bitterest enemies. They come together to protect Tamriel as one. This shows us that the Daedric Princes are a common enemy to all living things. But maybe it's not that simple. In the Elder Scrolls universe, things aren't just black and white, there's a whole lot of gray in between. Even behind chaos and evil, you can sometimes find reasons that make sense. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in this video. We'll dig into these questions and also go over the basic Daedric lore you'll want to know before Elder Scrolls 6 comes out. If you enjoy this kind of Elder Scrolls content, liking this video and subscribing to the channel really helps me out, and it lets me keep making more videos for you. I'm also really looking forward to reading your thoughts and theories about the 6th game in the comments, so don't forget to share them with me. Enjoy the video. Chapter 1: Cosmology of Tamriel. Before we talk about the major Daedric invasions of Tamriel in the Elder Scrolls universe, we first need to understand what the Daedra actually are, and where they stand in the grand scheme of things. That's why, in the first half of this video, I'll be covering the cosmology of the Elder Scrolls universe, how the concept of Daedra came to be, the philosophical nature of their existence, and, at least as far as we can tell, their purpose. But before we dive into all that, I need to say this. Concepts like religion and philosophy are incredibly complex in our own world. And in Elder Scrolls, things like religion, the Daedra, and chaos are just as complicated. So while I'll try to keep things as simple as possible, I'll be focusing on the most commonly accepted lore and interpretations. Still, we should accept that there may never be a single, clear explanation for all this. And honestly, that's what makes this universe so fascinating, a world full of mystery and philosophy. The spirits of the beginning and their origins. Before everything began, there was nothing. From this primordial void, two ancient and opposing forces emerged, Anu and Padome. Anu represents stasis and order, while Padome stands for change and chaos. Different races across Tamriel might use different names for them, but at the core, they're talking about the same forces. The cosmic interaction between these two forces gave birth to something called Orbis, which you can think of as the universe or the cosmos in Elder Scrolls terms. With the creation of Orbis came all the original spirits, or as some would call them, gods. These original spirits are known to mortals as Et Ada, a term that hardcore Elder Scrolls fans will definitely recognize. I've said this in almost every video. The Elder Scrolls universe is built on layers and layers of storytelling, and that complexity shows up here too. Each culture in Tamriel has its own version of how the Et Ada came to be. In other words, we're dealing with multiple creation myths. Trying to figure out which one is true is probably a waste of time. So instead, I'll quickly go over the two most well-known versions, which will help us better understand the origins of the Aedra and Daedra. In the first version, Aedra were born from the mixing of Anu and Padome's blood during a cosmic battle. The Daedra, on the other hand, came from Padome's pure blood. According to this story, the Daedra contain both good and evil within them, while the Daedra reflect Padame's destructive, chaotic nature. This idea that the Daedra came from Padame's pure essence is actually the foundation for why some people in Tamriel worship the Daedra and reject the Daedra. To them, Padame is the one true creator god. Now, when we think about Padame representing chaos and destruction, it's easy to fall into the trap of assuming the Daedra are purely evil. But we have to be careful with that line of thinking. There are Daedra like Azura and Meridia who aren't entirely evil, who sometimes act in ways that actually help mortals in Tamriel. Because of examples like these, the idea that all Daedra are purely evil is definitely up for debate. Sound familiar? When we think about divine beings in our own world, don't we often run into the same thing? Beings that are subjective, contradictory, and not easily defined as purely good or evil. The same is true in the Elder Scrolls universe. And this isn't some kind of flaw in the lore. It's actually one of the most brilliant parts of it. It reflects how we mortals interpret cosmic events through cultural lenses and limited understanding. Alright, enough rambling, let's move on to the second creation myth, one that's more common in Altmer culture. In this version, Anu, the all-encompassing force and source of all power, created Anuiel, the soul of all things, in order to reflect on himself and understand his own nature. Basically, he gave birth to his own soul. Anuiel, wanting to do the same, created a set of limitations to help define his traits and reflect on them. Those limitations came together to form Sithis, another form of Padame. The interaction between these two souls gave rise to Orbis, and eventually the Et Ada. This version of the story shows that the fundamental paradox of existence, the constant tension between order and chaos, lies at the very heart of the divine. At the end of the day, both myths share the same core theme, the essential interaction between stasis and change, between order and chaos. This cosmic duality is the root of all divine beings in the Elder Scrolls universe, and it's the foundation on which the entire story is built. So now we've explored the possible beginnings of existence from the void. At this point, Orbis, the universe that includes Mundus, Oblivion, Aetherius, and the surrounding void, has been created. In the next part, we'll dive into the creation of the world where all our stories take place, Tamriel, and how the split between Daedra and Daedra truly began. The creation of Mundus and the Great Divergence. Mundus is the plane of existence that includes the mortal planet Nirn, where the continent of Tamriel is, and a few other celestial bodies. The creation of Mundus goes hand in hand with the emergence of the concepts of Daedra and Daedra. At this point in the story, there was no real division among the Daedra. Then came a god named Lorkhan, who proposed the idea of creating a mortal plane, what we now call Mundus. Lorkhan's true origin is unknown, but one theory claims he was created by Sithis to bring about destruction, because the Daedra were enslaving everything they created. Of course, it's also possible that Lorkhan was simply an Daedra driven by the urge to create. But the common belief is that Lorkhan tricked the others. He knew he couldn't create Mundus alone, so he somehow convinced the Daedra to help, and they ended up sacrificing a huge part of their power for this creation. Some sources say the Daedra were persuaded, others claim they were deceived. This disagreement actually lies at the very heart of the historic conflict between elves and humans. The mortal world of Nirn was a place entirely made up of limitations. Because of this, the Daedra who took part in its creation began to die, or in many cases, simply vanished. Eventually, things got so bad that Magnus, the architect of the project, decided to abandon it entirely. He left the Mundus plane, and legend says that the tear he left behind became the sun itself. I won't go too deep into the rest of that creation myth right now, but here's what matters. Not all of the Daedra joined the project. Some either refused Lorkhan's offer or realized they were being tricked and backed out. These are the gods known as Daedra, which in the Altmer language means not our ancestors. Because they didn't sacrifice their power, the Daedra were able to create their own realms. These are the planes of Oblivion we're familiar with today. But whether it's because of ambition, jealousy, or something in their nature, they haven't been able to completely let go of Tamriel. That's why they continue to interfere in the lives of mortals from time to time. Chapter 2. Daedra. The Daedra, those Daedra who refused Lorkhan's proposal to create the mortal world, are, unlike the Daedra, still at full power. They can directly interfere in mortal affairs whenever they choose. Their physical forms and their realms within Oblivion allow them to freely communicate with mortals. Also, unlike the Daedra can't truly be killed. Even if their physical form is destroyed, their spirit, the core of their being, returns to the void of Oblivion. There, it waits until it can take physical form again. That's why we usually say a Daedra is banished, not killed. because the term Daedra can sometimes be confused with lesser beings created by the Ada. The truly powerful ones, those with original souls, are called Daedric Princes. For the rest of this video, when I say Daedra, I'll be referring specifically to these godlike Daedric Princes. Each Daedra has their own realm within Oblivion, and these realms are direct reflections of their personal nature. For example, we know mehrunesdagon well from the 4th game. His realm, the Deadlands, is a literal manifestation of who he is. The same goes for Mephalah's Spiral Skein or Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha. In fact, in Elder Scrolls lore, there's a saying, princes are their realms. Let me take a quick detour here. In Oblivion Redscar Cavern, the leader of the Mythic Dawn claims that the mortal world actually is an Oblivion realm originally belonging to Lorkhan, and that it was stolen from him by the Daedra. According to him, all mortals are living a lie. Now, I'm not saying I agree with Cameron or think he's right, but I do think this idea has a kind of poetic depth that fits perfectly with the Elder Scrolls universe. And, as always with this world, we can never really know if his claim is true, which just adds to the mystery at the heart of it all. Because of the destruction some Daedra cause, mortals often see them as evil. And in some belief systems, Daedra are considered pure evil. But here's what we know. Daedra act according to their own moral code, which is rooted in what they are, not in mortal concepts of good or evil. Their immorality comes from their limitless nature and their different cosmic choices. This actually lets them embody their concepts without being bound by human or elven morals. That's why their actions can often be extreme versions of the domains they represent. Unlike the Daedra, who are weakened and can only act in limited, indirect ways, the Daedra can engage with mortals much more directly, usually to represent change or, more often, destruction. In short, the Daedra are the physical embodiment of the concepts they represent. Daedra show a great deal of interest in mortals, but we can't really say there's a single reason why. Even now, we don't fully understand the true nature of some Daedra, or the motivations behind their actions. In most cases, though, their interest seems tied to amusement or a hunger for power. They might offer mortals gifts or make pacts with them, but these usually come with a cost: madness, physical transformation, or some steep price. Daedric Spheres. It's believed that there are 16 or possibly 17 known Daedric Princes. Since the records aren't completely clear, we can't say for sure. Each prince has a sphere, basically a set of interests or domains. They don't have absolute control over these spheres, but they represent the concepts the princes are most concerned with. And these spheres are often the reason why they get involved in mortal affairs. For example, Molagbal is known as the Prince of Domination and Rape. His realm, Cold Harbor, is a twisted, decaying version of Tamriel. Those who end up there are stripped of their will and condemned to eternal torment. Mehrunesdagon is the Prince of Destruction, Revolution, and Change. He sees chaos as sacred. That's why he's tried to invade Tamriel multiple times. His goal is to tear down order and impose his own version of chaos. Sheogorath is the embodiment of madness. He blurs the line between reality and imagination. Nocturnal is the goddess of secrets, fate, and darkness. She once tried to seize control of the Crystal Tower to unravel reality itself and plunge mortals into darkness. Azura stands out as the goddess of fate, change, and twilight. She's seen as a more benevolent figure in many cultures, but she still has a place in the grand game of power. Clavicus Vile tricks mortals through deals and promises. Every bargain with him comes with a hidden price that must be paid. Most Daedric princes, with a few exceptions, see each other as siblings. But that doesn't mean they're friendly, far from it. They often compete, try to take over each other's realms, or steal one another's power. Because of their chaotic and selfish nature, Daedric princes usually act alone. There have been rare moments in history when multiple princes have worked together, but it never lasts. One of the biggest examples of this is when Nocturnal, Clavicus Vile, and Mefalah teamed up to take control of the Crystal Tower in Somerset. At first, they cooperated, but later, Nocturnal betrayed the others and took the power for herself. To me, this tendency to act alone and betray even their closest allies is one of the clearest reflections of their chaotic nature and their godhood. Daedric Princes and Mortals. Daedric Princes are seen as either gods or demons by the people of Tamriel. Mortals usually call the Daedra good because they sacrifice their power to create the world, while they see the Daedra as evil or at least morally gray. But really, these labels reflect nothing more than the mortal point of view. Because Daedra often act in extreme ways, many humans and elves fear them. Some princes, like Boethia, Molag-bal, mehrunesdagon, and Vermina, have a clear tendency toward destruction and violence. And in many cases, they seem to actually enjoy it. For some of them, violence is purely about pleasure and entertainment. So yeah, on the surface, the Daedra do come off as demon-like figures, but that's not how every culture sees them. Daedric worship is actually widespread across Tamriel. As you'll remember from the games, we constantly run into cultists devoted to the Daedra, and usually end up clashing with them in serious conflicts. We also see many shrines and temples built in honor of these princes. Why do people worship them? Well, some just want power, plain and simple. Others think the Daedra will eventually rise as the true gods, and they want to secure a strong position for themselves when that happens. A third reason is the desire to serve or surrender to something greater than themselves. Daedric Princes often give tasks or quests to those who worship them, and it's believed they reward followers once those tasks are completed. But most of the time, these quests are just for the Daedra's own amusement. From what we've seen, anyone thinking of worshipping or summoning a Daedric Prince should think long and hard before doing it. Most of these chaotic gods see their followers as toys, or tools to be used and thrown away. I say most because there are some Daedric Princes who actually care about their followers, some even to an obsessive degree. I'll talk more about that in the upcoming sections. So, how exactly do the Daedra see mortals? What do they find interesting about them? We already know that most Daedric Princes don't really care much about mortals. They often treat them like toys. Some see mortals as prey and themselves as hunters. It's kind of like a cat playing with a mouse. There are even Daedric Princes who take pure joy in torturing mortals just for fun. That's their way of blowing off steam. And when I say torture, I hope it's clear I'm talking about very real, brutal acts of violence. But in certain cases, a Daedric Prince can genuinely admire a mortal. Sometimes a mortal, usually the hero we're playing as, manages to resist their temptations or disrupt their plans. In those moments, some Daedra actually praise that mortal and express admiration for them. But at the same time, they also show disappointment, frustration, and even anger when they're outsmarted or defeated. That's where the Daedra's fascination with mortals really comes into focus. Despite everything, failure, death, loss, suffering, mortals keep fighting. They keep living. They hold on to hope. No matter how hard life gets, they try to carve out a little bit of happiness. And this connection to hope and joy is something that Daedric Princes find fascinating. They don't understand how mortals can go through so much pain and still not give up. Since the Daedra have never experienced death themselves, it's a mystery to them. They often feel despair in the face of failure or pain. That's one reason they get involved in mortal lives. They're drawn to this resilience, even if they don't fully grasp it. Daedric Princes are amoral by nature. Their actions aren't shaped by any human sense of ethics. They're guided by their own spheres. Take molagbal, for example. His desire to enslave souls and commit cruel acts isn't evil to him. It's simply an expression of what he is. The same goes for mehrunesdagon. His urge to reshape Tamriel through destruction and change isn't just some plan, it's his very nature. This kind of cosmic drive is what makes their involvement with the mortal world inevitable. All that said, many Daedra still see mortals as nothing more than entertainment, disposable tools, or pawns in their grand schemes. Their interest in Mundus often comes down to either amusement or a desire to expand their influence. And honestly, one of the best examples of both their immorality and their inescapable nature is something molagbal once said: "My love is accidentally shaped like a spear." To me, that line perfectly sums up what the Daedra are all about. Worshipping Daedric Princes. Motivations and benefits. Despite their chaotic and unpredictable nature, worship of the Daedric Princes is actually quite common across Tamriel. The motivations behind this kind of worship are complex and varied. Given how culturally diverse Tamriel is, it's not really that surprising to me. In fact, many Daedric cults are rooted in deep cultural and traditional foundations. This is especially clear with the Dunmer, who openly worship several Daedra, and the way different cultures label Daedra as good or evil only adds to this diversity. Because the Daedric Princes didn't sacrifice their essence during the creation of Mundus, they're significantly more powerful than the Daedric gods. Thanks to this retained power, they can interfere in mortal affairs, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And let's be honest, in almost every game, we end up dealing with at least a few Daedric Princes. Some of them are a real pain. This difference in power and presence is probably a big reason why many mortals choose to worship the Daedra. Think about it. In Daedric worship, actually receiving a clear answer is almost impossible. You might get a vague blessing or a faint feeling of divine energy. Nothing all that useful. But the Daedric Princes, they offer mortals tangible rewards. Sometimes they even speak directly to them. This result-driven interaction makes Daedric worship incredibly appealing, especially for those seeking power, knowledge, or quick solutions to their problems. To make this clearer, let me give a few examples of what Daedric Princes actually offer. Molagbal gives vampirism, Hircine grants lycanthropy, supernatural mutations with real power. Artifacts like Azura's Star or the Ogma Infinium offer immense strength to those who wield them. Hermaeus Mora gifts his champions forbidden knowledge and hidden truths. Many who turn to Daedra do so because they see the Aedra's silence as neglect. When they're in deep pain or desperate for help, the Daedra are the ones who actually answer. Remember in Elder Scrolls Online, a member of the Sigic Order who Lathan lost his child and, in his grief, started worshipping Mephala. He eventually became her count. Even Martin Septim, the man who transformed into the avatar of Akatosh and saved Tamriel from destruction, had worshipped the Daedra in his youth. Most Elder Scrolls games also give us the choice to worship the Daedra. Now personally, I don't think Daedric worship is the right path, but I've always felt a strange connection to Azura when I play. Cultural affiliations in Daedric worship. For some cultures, Daedric worship isn't just a transactional act like I mentioned earlier, it's a deeply rooted part of their history, identity, and social structure. It's a view of history that blends with Elder Scrolls mythology and often carries a kind of poetic quality. And honestly, that's one of the things I find most powerful about the storytelling in the Elder Scrolls universe. When we look at the Dunmer, the Orcs, the Khajiit, and the Reachmen, it becomes clear that Daedric worship is far more than just a desperate plea for power. In these societies, the Daedric Princes are woven into their origin myths, their unique social structures, and even their moral and spiritual beliefs. This deep integration makes Daedric worship a lasting and powerful religious practice, even when it's condemned by outside forces. The Dunmer, as a whole race, worship the Daedra. They revere three princes in particular, calling them the Good Daedra: Azura, Boethia, and Mephala. These princes guided the Dunmer's ancestors as they formed their own culture and survived countless threats. During the Tribunal era, when Sothasil, Vivek, and Almalexia used the Heart of Lorkhan to grant themselves godhood for over 1,000 years, this worship declined. But after the Tribunal fell, the Dunmer returned to their roots. We'll revisit this later in the video, especially when we talk about the conflict between Azura and the Tribunal. The Orsimer, or Orcs, trace their origins back to Malakath, the god and protector of outcasts. There's a tale that says Malakath was once Trinimac, an Aedra who was devoured by Boethia, then expelled and reborn as Malakath. But this version mostly comes from Altmer sources. The Orcs acknowledge that Trinimac came before Malakath, but they view that story as cultural propaganda. The Khajiit worship Azura as a central figure in their creation myths, and they believe they owe their many forms to her. In Khajiiti belief, the line between Aedra and Daedra is very thin. That's why worship of other princes like Sheogorath and Namira is also quite common among them. The Reach folk, better known to many as the Forsworn, have worshipped Daedric princes like Hircine and Namira since ancient times, referring to them as their old gods. To other cultures, this is disturbing, especially since Hircine is the violent god of the hunt, and Namira rules over all things grotesque and vile. If you remember from Skyrim, the Forsworn have a strong connection to dark magic, rituals, and necromancy, and these practices are closely tied to their Daedric beliefs. You can find Daedra worshippers almost everywhere in Tamriel, whether you're in High Rock, Skyrim, or Cyrodiil. While traveling, you might be ambushed by a cultist on the road or stumble into a hidden shrine deep within a cave or dungeon. Now, based on everything we've talked about so far, you might be thinking that Daedra worship is basically the same as devil worship in our own world. But that's not quite accurate. Because of the presence of magic, the Elder Scrolls universe follows a different set of moral rules than our world. And if you look at history, you'll find plenty of moments where Daedric princes like Azura or Meridia actually stepped in to help at critical times. Before we move on to the next part, I want to mention one more motivation behind Daedric worship. Some princes promise their followers a kind of afterlife, a realm in Oblivion shaped around their desires. It's not uncommon for Daedric princes to use this promise to lure in worshippers, and in some cases, they even follow through on it. Think of Mankar Camoran's paradise in Oblivion, his own custom realm within Oblivion. And when you consider Edric beliefs, like the Nords of Skyrim who believe in Sovngarde as a final resting place, it's not surprising that Daedra worshippers would hope for something similar from their own gods. But we should never forget, every deal with a Daedric prince comes at a price. There are countless stories throughout history proving that no agreement, no favor, and no blessing from a prince ever comes free. In the end, they still see mortals as toys or disposable tools, and more often than not, their worshippers end up in serious trouble. Take vampirism, for example. To some, it looks like ultimate power or a path to immortality, but it's actually a curse from Molag Bal. Even Meridia, often seen as a good Daedra and the Prince of Light, is known for stripping her followers of free will in the name of purity. In Elder Scrolls Online, we see this clearly with the Golden Knight. He believed he was making noble sacrifices of his own free will, only to later realize that Meridia had planned everything all along. His heartbreak when he learns the truth says it all. Then there's Clavicus Vile, famous for twisting the wishes of his followers. These twisted bargains often end up creating problems far worse than the ones people were trying to solve in the first place. When the Vestige accepted Clavicus Vile's help, they didn't even know what price they'd have to pay, but they were so desperate they went along with it anyway. Daedric worship and empire. Many Daedric cults engage in practices that are morally questionable, or downright horrific. These include brutal sacrifices, ritualistic murders, cannibalism, soul entrapment, and necromancy. Historically, the Aliads carried out dark ceremonies where they tortured Nedic slaves for the amusement of their Daedric gods. Eventually, these horrors led to the slave Alessia's rebellion, which ultimately gave birth to the first human empire. It's a powerful example of how Daedric rituals, when used to oppress people, can spark fierce resistance. Because of things like this, Daedric worship is largely seen as taboo or outright evil by the mainstream religious authorities across Tamriel, especially within the borders of the Empire. And honestly, when you consider the historical disasters tied to Daedric cults, that rejection starts to make a lot of sense. Some of these cults were directly responsible for two of the most catastrophic events in Tamriel's history, the Oblivion Crisis and the Planemeld. Both brought the entire world to the brink of annihilation, leaving behind deep fear and hatred in the hearts of the people. From the day it was founded, the Empire officially adopted a religious structure created by Alessia. At first, it was the 8 divines, and later, with the addition of Talos, the 9 divines. All of these gods are Daedra. This is seen as proof that the Empire, by design, stands firmly against Daedra worship. And it's kind of ironic, isn't it? Considering that, at one point in history, a Daedric cultist rose to power within the Empire and brought Tamriel to the edge of destruction. So when you look at it that way, the Empire's ban on Daedra worship doesn't seem so unnecessary after all. Chapter 3. The major attacks of the Daedric Princes on Mundus. The Daedric Princes, some of the most mysterious and powerful beings in the Elder Scrolls universe, have intervened in the history of Tamriel countless times, just as we've seen throughout the games. As we've already discussed, their motivations for interfering aren't just about causing evil for the sake of it. Their actions are usually a reflection of their very nature. In the examples I'll go through shortly, you'll see how each intervention lines up perfectly with a prince's desires and domain. That subtext shows us that Daedric princes aren't just simple villains. They're complex beings with inner flaws or existential needs that drive them. The princes have influenced Mundus in many different ways, through direct invasions, by using powerful Daedric artifacts, or by manipulating their mortal followers behind the scenes. The Merethic Era, the attack on the Lunar Lattice. The attack on the Lunar Lattice is considered one of the earliest known assaults on the mortal realm. Its source lies in Khajiit mythology, so you might come across different names for certain divine beings depending on the texts. But for this video, I'll be using the more commonly known names for these gods and princes. The Lunar Lattice is a cosmic barrier created by Joan and Jode, Nirn's twin moons, and it plays a central role in Khajiit belief. It acts as a shield that blocks Padome, the force of chaos, from crossing through Oblivion, the Great Darkness, and entering the mortal realm. According to Khajiit myth, powerful Daedric princes like Meridia, molagbal, and mehrunesdagon were among the first to attack the Lattice, attempting to break the barrier so Padome could pass through. The legend says Meridia led the assault, but was stopped by Azura in front of the gate of Varlians. Azura cast her into the void and bound her with mirrors. It's also said that Boethia and molagbal clashed at the barrier, and Azura chained Molag using secrets only she knew. Mehrunesdagon, with his purely destructive nature, was used as a weapon against the barrier. Each of these assaults reflects the essential nature of the prince behind it. Meridia, called a cold spirit born of light without love, is said to have attacked the Lunar Lattice out of a desire to expand her control and influence. She's also known as the Lady of Greed, so this behavior aligns well with her character. Molagbal, the Prince of Domination and Enslavement, was among the first to strike the Lattice, driven by his very essence, which seeks to crush and subjugate all existence. Mehrunesdagon, as the Prince of Destruction and Revolution, was unleashed on the barrier as a pure force of chaos, a perfect embodiment of his philosophy. Thanks to the defense led by Azura and Boethia, the Lunar Lattice was preserved. And this event further cemented the Lattice's importance in Khajiit cosmology. It's the structure Azura tied them to when creating the Khajiit, and it has served ever since as a shield protecting Nirn from Oblivion. Of course, it's worth remembering that these are mythological stories. Still, the attack on the Lunar Lattice reveals the complex relationships and rivalries among the Daedric Princes. The fact that Meridia allied with molagbal and mehrunesdagon, despite her well-known hatred for Molag, shows that Daedric Princes are willing to form temporary alliances to pursue shared goals. This reminds us that Daedric Princes can't be boxed into simple good or evil labels. They're beings driven by their own nature and interests. These kinds of alliances highlight the shifting power dynamics between the princes and their strategic pragmatism. If a goal serves their sphere, they won't hesitate to work with former enemies. And that's exactly what makes them so morally ambiguous and so unpredictable. First Era, the attack on Mournhold. In the year 29-20 of the First Era, mehrunesdagon launched a devastating attack on Mournhold, the capital of Morrowind. During the assault, the central courtyard of Castle Mournhold was obliterated by endlessly erupting flames. Thick, tar-like smoke filled the streets, setting fire to anything made of wood or paper. Bat-like creatures with massive wings dragged citizens out of their hiding places, forcing them to face Dagon's army head-on. The only thing that kept the city from burning to the ground was the wet, sizzling blood of its own people. As he surveyed the destroyed castle, Dagon expressed his satisfaction, glad that he hadn't missed out on all the fun. This attack wasn't just an invasion, it was a direct expression of mehrunesdagon's philosophy of destruction and his desire to reshape Mundus in his own fiery image. His goal was never just conquest, it was to tear down the old order and replace it with his own chaotic will. In the end, mehrunesdagon was banished by Almalexia and Sotha Sil. The event went down in history as one of many instances where Dagon tried to invade Nirn. Though the city was eventually rebuilt, the attack left a deep and lasting scar in Dunmer history. The assault on Mournhold is an early and dramatic example of a Daedric prince coming into direct conflict with mortal political and religious leaders. The fact that the tribunal was able to drive Dagon back shows that mortals, or at least demigods, aren't completely powerless against Daedric threats. Still, the scale of destruction in the city proves that even a successful defense comes with a heavy price, and mortal resistance alone isn't always enough to prevent devastation. First Era, the attack on Gilverdale. Same times of the First Era, molagbal completely annihilated the wood elf town of Gilverdale. According to legend, molagbal set foot in the town and consumed it. A bright red mist spread over Gilverdale, swallowing its buildings and violently killing every inhabitant. Known as the Prince of Domination and the Enslavement of Souls, molagbal's destruction of Gilverdale was a pure expression of his nature. One source claims that this event was triggered when the King of Senchal summoned molagbal to punish a bard. If true, it highlights how Daedric princes can exploit even petty mortal conflicts to justify their devastating actions. The destruction of Gilverdale later became the catalyst for the Cold Harbor Compact, an agreement made in the Third Era by Sotha Sil and 8 powerful Daedric princes. The goal of this pact was to prevent the princes from physically manifesting on Nirn. So Gilverdale wasn't just the fall of a town, it was a cosmic-level event that forced mortals to start building defenses against Daedric interference. As a direct result of this disaster, mortals realized they needed a way to protect themselves, and the Compact was their answer. It shows that the consequences of Daedric actions can go far beyond a single place or people. Sometimes they change the very rules of reality. In that sense, Mundus isn't just a passive victim, but its resistance often comes at great cost. The attack on Gilverdale wasn't just local destruction, it led to a fundamental shift in how mortals and Daedra are allowed to interact. Umaril and Meridia Alliance. Throughout history, Tamriel has faced destruction many times due to alliances between mortals and Daedric princes. One such example is the alliance between Umaril and Meridia. Umaril the Unfeathered was an Ayleid sorcerer king, a half-elf who ruled over Tamriel during the Merethic era and enslaved the Cyronetic humans. Meridia was worshipped by the Ayleids as the embodiment of light. In return, she blessed Umaril with immortality. This immortality allowed his soul to survive in Oblivion after his physical death, eventually letting him rebuild his body, just like the Daedra. The reason Meridia supported the Ayleids was because they worshipped her extensively and viewed her as one of the core forces of creation, light itself. Meridia is known to despise free will and rebellion, preferring to mold her followers into extensions of her own will. The fact that the Ayleids practiced slavery didn't matter to her. After all, she was a prince who craved control. Let's not forget that Meridia is a deeply narcissistic being, obsessed with praise and devotion. The fact that an entire society worshipped her as a divine being definitely caught her attention. Umaril's main reason for forging an alliance with Meridia and gaining immortality was his desire for revenge against the Divines, especially those he blamed for his fall at the hands of Pelennor Whitestrake and the Alessian Rebellion. Meridia shared that hatred, as she too was in conflict with the Divines. Even though Umaril was physically slain by Pelennor Whitestrake in the First Era, his soul lived on in Oblivion thanks to Meridia's blessing. Thousands of years later, at the end of the Third Era, Umaril returned. He and his army attacked the chapels of Dibella in Anvil and Mara in Bravil, seeking revenge against the Daedric gods. To defeat Umaril for good, the hero of Kvatch, also known as the Divine Crusader, gathered Pelennor's Crusader's relics and received the blessing of Talos. This allowed him to follow Umaril not just in the physical realm, but also into the spiritual one, finally destroying his soul completely. Meridia's support for Umaril shows that she doesn't fit neatly into any good or evil category. Her involvement was a reflection of her sphere and her ambitions. Even though she's known for hating undead and necromancy, she still supported the Ayleids, despite their use of slavery and necromantic practices. This suggests that, for Meridia, the destruction of free will and the dominance of her own will took priority over her hatred of necromancy. As long as the Ayleids fully submitted to her, their other evil actions were acceptable, because they served her greater purpose. It's a powerful example of how the moral compass of a Daedric prince operates very differently from that of mortals. For them, everything revolves around the absolute nature of their sphere. And really, that's been a central idea throughout this entire video. I hope that with examples like this, that concept is now clearer than ever. Second Era, the Planemeld. The Second Era was marked by major Daedric threats, especially those involving molagbal. Thanks to Elder Scrolls Online, we as players actually get to witness and stop some of these events firsthand. That's why the examples from this era are often easier to understand. They're ones we've actively experienced. The Planemeld, which occurred in Second Era 582 during the middle of the Three Banners War, was one of the greatest Daedric invasions Tamriel has ever faced. At the heart of this threat was molagbal. He used massive Daedric interplanar machines called Dark Anchors to try and drag Nirn into his own realm, Cold Harbor. These anchors latched onto the land and slowly tore parts of Nirn away, sending them drifting into Oblivion. Once separated, those pieces were reshaped into pocket realms of Cold Harbor and then joined a hybrid space where Tamriel and Cold Harbor merged, known as the Planar Vortex. It was a massive and incredibly ambitious plan, and if you've played Elder Scrolls Online, I'm sure you remember the terrifying moment a Dark Anchor drops. Honestly, I have to admit, it's a very creative plan. The Planemeld was triggered by an earlier event called the Soul Burst. In Second Era 578, Molagbal's agent, the necromancer Manimarco, convinced Emperor Varen Aquilarios to perform a ritual that would supposedly make him dragonborn. But instead of relighting the dragon fires, the ritual weakened the ancient barriers between Nirn and Oblivion. Molagbal's ultimate goal was to pull the White Gold Tower itself into Cold Harbor. He opened the largest dark anchor right above the Imperial city. His motivation was, as always, total domination, to cripple, enslave, and reshape all of existence under his will. This wasn't about fixing anything in Cold Harbor, it was about forcing all of Tamriel to submit to his control. When the Soul Burst happened, shockwaves were felt across Nirn. Mages died or went mad, Red Mountain and Morrowind rumbled, earthquakes shook Skyrim, and violent storms hit the shores of Elsewhere and Valenwood. I mention all this so you can really grasp how massive and destructive the Planemeld was, just how dangerous a Daedric threat can be to all of Tamriel. And yet, believe it or not, the Planemeld was stopped. It took the combined efforts of Meridia's forces and the 8 Divines. Playing as the Vestige in Elder Scrolls Online, we reclaim the Amulet of Kings and defeat Manimarco. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild then launch a counter-invasion into Cold Harbor. Finally, the Vestige uses the Amulet of Kings to channel the power of Akatosh, confronts Molagbal alone, defeats him, banishes him to the Void, and frees all the souls he had captured, ending the Planemeld. The Planemeld is one of the clearest and most ambitious examples of a Daedric prince trying to merge Mundus with their own plane. It shows that Daedric princes aren't just about chaos, they also have the power to impose their own reality onto the mortal world. At the same time, it's a powerful reminder that mortals can resist, even overcome, these cosmic threats by wielding divine power. The Vestige's use of Akatosh's strength to defeat Molagbal foreshadows what we'll later see during the Oblivion Crisis. Earlier in this video, I mentioned how Daedric gods rarely intervene in the mortal realm. But as we can see here, especially in Akatosh's case, they do act when the stakes are high enough. Triad Conspiracy. The Triad Conspiracy is a major storyline that Elder Scrolls Online players will definitely remember. It's an alliance between three Daedric Princes, Nocturnal, Mephala, and Clavicus Vile, who joined forces with the goal of reshaping Mundus in their own image. This conspiracy took place in the same year as the Planemeld, right after molagbal's failed invasion. Their goals were ambitious: to steal the divine power of Vivec, the living Dunmer god, to seize control of Sothasil's Clockwork City, and finally to use the Altmer's sacred crystal tower as a conduit to rewrite reality itself. At the heart of it, all three princes were driven by the same desire: to claim a place of immense power in order to rewrite the rules of reality and recreate the world as they saw fit. What's strange is that, even though Daedric Princes are notoriously bad at working together, these three actually managed to form a coordinated plan that had been centuries in the making. Of course, even within this alliance, betrayal was inevitable. At one point, Nocturnal turned against the others and tried to steal the heart of the Crystal Tower for herself. Her ultimate goal wasn't just domination, it was to erase reality entirely. That betrayal highlights just how fragile alliances between Daedric Princes really are. In the end, every prince always serves their own selfish nature. The conspiracy was stopped in various ways, and here comes one of the most ironic twists. After Nocturnal betrayed the others, Mephala and Clavicus Vile actually helped the Vestige stop her. So yes, the Vestige and the Psijic Order defeated one Daedric Prince, with the help of two others. It's a perfect example of how quickly allegiances between Daedric Princes can shift. The Triad Conspiracy proves that Daedric Princes can form short-lived alliances to pose a serious threat to Mundus, but their very nature makes it nearly impossible for them to maintain any kind of long-term, unified effort. At least, that's how things have worked in the Elder Scrolls series so far. Could that change in the Elder Scrolls 6? We'll just have to wait and see. The Four Ambitions. This event gets its name from four incredibly powerful weapons of mass destruction created by mehrunesdagon as part of a pact with the Longhouse Emperors. But when the deal went wrong, Nirn was once again threatened, this time by Dagon himself. As the Prince of Destruction and Change, mehrunesdagon once again used mortal leaders to serve his own purposes in an attempt to conquer Tamriel. Believing Nirn belonged to him and determined to destroy it and remake it in his own image, Dagon pushed forward with his plan, but was ultimately stopped by the Vestige. The true significance of this event lies in what it foreshadows: the Oblivion Crisis. During the Four Ambitions storyline, mehrunesdagon was far less experienced when it came to launching an all-out assault on Tamriel. But after this failure, he learned from his mistakes, setting the stage for what would become the most devastating invasion Tamriel has ever seen. Dagon being banished back to Oblivion by the Vestige and his actions that followed show us something important. Even a Daedric Prince can learn and evolve. They can adapt their strategies over time, and if we ever face an enemy like molagbal or mehrunesdagon again in the Elder Scrolls 6, we should expect that fight to be far more dangerous than anything we've faced before. Third Era, the Imperial Simulacrum. Now we've come to one of my personal favorite periods in Elder Scrolls history, the Imperial Simulacrum. This 10-year span, from 3rd Era 389 to 399, took place during the Septim Empire and is one of the most dramatic political crises in Tamriel's history. It was during this time that the Imperial battle mage Jagar Tharn trapped our beloved Emperor Uriel Septim VII in a pocket dimension of Oblivion and secretly took his place, ruling the Empire in his stead. And, probably no surprise at this point, mehrunesdagon was involved here too. Tharn struck a deal with Dagon, helping him invade Battlespire, the Imperial training ground for battle mages, and allowing him to destroy it from within. Tharn's main motivation was personal ambition and the desire to rule the Empire indefinitely. To weaken the Imperial Legion, which posed a threat to his false rule, he allied with Dagon, whose goal, as always, was to unleash chaos and destruction in Mundus. And for 10 long years under Tharn's rule, that's exactly what happened. Tamriel fell into disarray. The economy collapsed, trade routes crumbled, communication broke down, and infighting spread across the provinces. By the time Uriel Septim finally returned, he inherited an empire in ruins. Tharn's ties to Dagon's cults and the overall instability within the empire allowed Daedric influence to grow stronger. And in the end, it was us, the players, who, as the Eternal Champion, defeated Tharn, freed Uriel Septim VII from Oblivion, and brought an end to this dark chapter. The Imperial Simulacrum is a powerful example of how Daedric Princes exploit weaknesses within mortal political systems. By manipulating ambitious individuals like Jagar Tharn, they can plunge Tamriel into chaos without needing to launch a direct invasion. And honestly, that's often how it goes. A Daedric prince steps into Tamriel not through force, but through the actions of a mortal. Which leads us directly to the next major event, perhaps the biggest of all, the Oblivion Crisis and the mortal who made it possible, Redscar Cavern. Oblivion Crisis. And now we've come to one of the most legendary, most destructive, and most unforgettable events in all of Tamriel's history. One that left a deep mark on every player who's experienced it firsthand. The Oblivion Crisis. In the year 3rd Era 433, at the very end of the 3rd Era, Emperor Umaril Septim VII, who had lived through events beyond any mortal's imagination, was assassinated. And with his death, the gates of Oblivion burst open across Tamriel. The Daedric hordes of mehrunesdagon, Prince of Destruction, Chaos, and Change began slaughtering people, destroying strongholds, and bringing entire kingdoms to their knees. The Oblivion Crisis is burned into the collective memory of every race across Tamriel. It brought catastrophic destruction and political upheaval, and it marked the end of the 433-year-long Septim dynasty. Long ago, Saint Alessia made a pact with Akatosh that ensured the gates of Oblivion would remain closed, as long as a ruler of Dragonblood sat on the Ruby Throne and the Dragon Fires remained lit. But when the mythic Dawn cult devoted to Dagon murdered Emperor Umaril Septim and all his heirs, the throne was left empty, breaking the ancient pact. With it, the divine barrier separating Oblivion and Mundus collapsed, and waves of Daedric armies poured into Tamriel. The destruction was widespread and brutal. Cyrodiil, the heart of the empire, suffered the most. Cities were razed, citizens massacred, trade routes crippled. The Somerset Isles nearly fell, and the Crystal Tower was lost to Daedric forces. Morrowind stood alone and was crushed under the onslaught. Even in Skyrim, centuries later, we still see the echoes of the crisis. Blackmarsh was a rare exception. It not only withstood the Daedric invasion, but chased Dagon's forces all the way back to Oblivion. And although the crisis was eventually stopped through the combined efforts of Martin Septim, Uriel's secret son, and the legendary hero of Kvatch, its impact rippled across the entire continent. I'm sure many of you remember the iconic scene where Martin Septim sacrifices himself, merging with Akatosh to become his avatar and defeat mehrunesdagon. By giving his life, Martin saved Tamriel, but also brought an end to the Septim bloodline. With the dynasty gone, the 3rd Era ended. Provinces began declaring independence, the Thalmor rose to power in the Somerset Isles, and expansionist politics took hold. In short, the world entered a new age, the 4th Era, also known as the Age of Wars. As we mentioned earlier in the video, mehrunesdagon had attempted to invade Tamriel before. Given that destruction, upheaval, and revolution are part of his very nature, it's no surprise that he tried again. But this time, thanks to lessons learned from past failures and the cult of Mythic Dawn flawlessly carrying out his plan, the devastation was on a whole new level. Dagon believed Nirn belonged to him. With the Septim Empire uniting everyone under one banner, he may have seen this as a threat to change itself, a world that had gone still, with no room left for chaos or transformation. That outlook reveals that Dagon isn't just about destruction, he's about existential renewal through ruin. The Oblivion Crisis stands as the clearest example of the full-scale threat a Daedric prince can pose to the mortal world, and at the same time, it's the ultimate proof of mortal and divine resistance. Martin's sacrifice and union with Akatosh show just how intertwined mortal destiny is with divine power, and the fact that centuries later in Skyrim, we're still dealing with the aftermath shows just how long-lasting Daedric interventions can be. Ironically, by ending the Septim line, Martin also broke the Alessian pact with Akatosh, but in doing so, he created a new, more permanent barrier between Oblivion and Mundus, one no longer tied to any mortal emperor. Well, that lasted about 207 years, until events in Skyrim made it clear that things might not be as stable as they seemed. 4th Era, Culling Prophecy. After the Oblivion Crisis, we know the power in Somerset Isles shifted, ushering in the rule of the Thalmor, a supremacist faction of High Elves. In the following years, the Elves slowly reclaimed the provinces once loyal to the Empire. Eventually, the Altmer, Bosmer, and Khajiit united to form the 3rd Aldmeri Dominion. The rise of this elven superpower led to a full-scale conflict with the Empire known as the Great War, one that spanned the entire continent. The 4th Era is generally remembered as a time of political instability, but even amid the chaos, the influence of the Daedric Princes on Tamriel didn't disappear. In fact, it continued, just in more subtle and insidious ways. During the Great War, a Thalmor general and known Daedra worshipper named Lord Narafin captured the Imperial city. Once in power, he attempted to fulfill an ancient prophecy known as the Culling. His plan? to sacrifice the city's entire population in a ritual that would unleash Daedric forces into the world. Narifin had powerful allies, most notably the Dremora Swordmaster Rave, a servant of Boethia and his loyal cult. He also used the Orb of Vermina, an artifact of the Daedric Prince of Dreams and Nightmares, to spy on and predict the movements of the Imperial Legion. Narifin's ultimate goal was to completely destroy the Empire by offering the Imperial city as a sacrifice. Boethia was the ideal prince to assist in this kind of scheme. Known for treachery, assassination, rebellion, and the overthrow of power, Boethia encourages mortals to usurp those stronger than themselves, and values cunning and conflict above all. It's no surprise that records from the war describe the massacre of citizens in the capital as particularly brutal and savage. Vermina, on the other hand, rules over dreams and nightmares. Her influence stems from the minds of those who sleep. By using her orb, Narifin was able to anticipate every move the Empire made, and with that knowledge successfully captured the Imperial city. This entire plot highlights how Daedric Princes continue to exploit mortal ambition to influence the fate of Tamriel. Their interventions might not always be direct anymore, but they remain dangerously effective. Fortunately, the Culling prophecy was never fulfilled. It was stopped by a mysterious figure known only as the Forgotten Hero, who confronted Lord Narifin and closed the Oblivion portal he had opened. And here's a strange and chilling detail. After his defeat, Narifin was supposedly hung from the Imperial Palace walls for 33 days, until, on the 34th day, a winged Daedra appeared and carried him away. That eerie tale sparked countless rumors about the Thalmor's deeper connections to the Daedra. We've already seen what happens when elves align themselves with these forces. Just think back to the events of the Second Era. It seems that with the rise of the Thalmor, Daedric worship may have found new opportunities to take root again. The Culling prophecy is proof that even after the Oblivion Crisis and the strengthening of the barriers between realms, thanks to Martin Septim's sacrifice, Daedric Princes can still interfere in the mortal world. But now it takes more. Massive soul sacrifices, complex rituals, and powerful mortal agents. Boethia's sphere of intrigue and rebellion aligns perfectly with mortals like Narifin, whose ambition and cruelty make them ideal pawns. This event is a great example of how Daedric threats have evolved over time. Even if they can no longer march through portals with ease, the danger they pose remains very real, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right mortal to light the fire again. Redscar Cavern. Before diving into this event, there's something important to clarify. This is a quest that comes from the Creation Club, and that opens up the usual debate. Is it canon or not? Now, you might ask, does it really matter if it's canon? And honestly, there are two valid answers to that question. Let me explain. If this quest is canon, then it opens the door to something truly dangerous, because it would be the first and only Oblivion Gate to appear in Tamriel since the death of Martin Septim. That would be a huge deal, especially when we're thinking about what might come in Elder Scrolls 6. On the other hand, if it's not canon, that might not matter much either. Bethesda has always taken a deliberately mysterious approach to Elder Scrolls lore. They never officially confirm what is or isn't canon. And beyond that, there's the concept of the Dragon Break, a phenomenon in the Elder Scrolls universe where all possible outcomes can happen at once. That makes questions like, did this really happen? A little meaningless. Because in a way, everything happened and nothing happened all at the same time. So as I talk about this event, just keep that in mind. In this quest, the Dragonborn encounters the remnants of the Mythic Dawn cult, followers of mehrunesdagon. Their leader, Vonos, attempts to open a permanent Oblivion Gate inside Redscar Cavern. And here's the scary part, he succeeds. Unlike the Oblivion Gates from the Crisis, this one doesn't disappear. No matter what the Dragonborn does, the gate stays open. The Vigilants of Stendarr eventually move in and take control of the area, keeping constant watch over the gate. But still, the fact that it's permanently open is chilling. This is arguably the strongest piece of evidence we have that the barriers between realms can still be breached, even after Martin's sacrifice. And that makes Redscar Cavern one of the biggest warning signs for Tamriel's future. It shows us that mehrunesdagon hasn't stopped. He's still out there, he's still active. And his cult is still working in the shadows. So whether or not this event is officially canon might not matter as much as we think, because it tells us one thing very clearly. The threat is far from over. Chapter 4. The possibility of a Daedric crisis in Elder Scrolls 6. After the Oblivion Crisis, we might have thought we were finally done with the Daedric Princes. But as we've seen, both in the events leading up to Skyrim and in Skyrim itself, that couldn't be further from the truth. Especially in the Fourth Era with the rise of the Aldmeri Dominion and the Daedric Shadow lurking behind the Thalmor, it's clear that a new Daedric Crisis may already be in motion. Take the Great War, for example. Behind the scenes, there were hints of Boethiah's influence. And in the growing conflict between elves and men, it's hard to deny that the Daedra are playing a role as well. These gods of chaos aren't sitting idly by. They're shaping the very age we live in. Ever since Elder Scrolls 6 was teased with that short trailer 7 years ago, fans have been asking, will the new game feature another civil war like in Skyrim? Will we witness the outbreak of a second Great War? Or will we be facing a much darker, more ancient threat? A full-blown Daedric invasion? If Elder Scrolls 6 does take that route, it would be pretty bold, because a threat like that doesn't just affect enemies, it shapes the entire world around us. The tone, the atmosphere, even the landscape itself would reflect that influence. Now, trying to guess the setting or the timeline of Elder Scrolls 6 is nearly impossible. With the time jumps between previous games, anything's on the table. That one teaser trailer gives us a tiny clue. It might be set in Hammerfell or High Rock, but even that's far from certain. One thing I can say with complete confidence, though, we will cross paths with Daedric Princes again. You can't separate Elder Scrolls from the Daedra. They've always been part of this world's DNA. One way or another, we'll run into a cult, or get pulled into some quest involving a Daedric artifact. And before we know it, we'll be neck-deep in trouble, just like always. If the main storyline in Elder Scrolls 6 ends up revolving around a Daedric threat again, I think that would catch a lot of players off guard. I know many fans are eager to see the outcome of the conflict between the Thalmor and the Empire, or the unresolved civil war in Skyrim. So if the new game skips over those and jumps into something more like Oblivion's main plot, it could be surprising, maybe even risky. But I'm not here to tell you whether that's good or bad. I'll leave that to you. Let me know in the comments, how would you feel if Elder Scrolls 6 brought us a Daedric-style main story again? Like Oblivion? Would you be excited? Disappointed? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's say a Daedric Crisis does end up being the main threat in Elder Scrolls 6. Who would be the main villain? Could we see molagbal returning with his Cold Harbor invasion? Personally, I think that's unlikely. That storyline was already the centerpiece of Elder Scrolls Online, and bringing it back might feel a bit repetitive to longtime players. What about another mehrunesdagon threat? That's more possible, but in that case, Bethesda would need to present him in a completely new way. Otherwise, it risks just being an Oblivion repeat. Now don't get me wrong, mehrunesdagon is a great antagonist. He's terrifying, his motivations are clear, and he's had multiple major assaults on Tamriel throughout history, so the idea of him returning again isn't far-fetched. But whether that would make for a good story, that's still up for debate. There is, however, one Daedric prince that I find especially interesting, Jyggalag, the Prince of Order. In the Shivering Isles expansion for Oblivion, we actually defeated him, and after that, Jyggalag retreated from Mundus, supposedly to seek revenge on the other Daedric princes who cursed him. In Skyrim, we didn't get any real update on that, other than stopping a madman who was obsessed with worshipping him. But I believe there's a real chance we could witness Jyggalag's revenge against the other princes in Elder Scrolls 6. Think about it. Almost every Daedric prince represents some form of chaos. Jyggalag, on the other hand, is pure, relentless order. He was so feared by the others that they all banded together to curse him, turning him into the mad god Sheogorath. But after the events of Shivering Isles, Sheogorath became the champion of Kvatch, you, the player. And Jyggalag was freed to roam his own realm in Oblivion. To me, that sounds like the perfect setup, especially for a side quest line. Can you imagine? A growing threat in the shadows, not from chaos, but from absolute, merciless order. It would be something completely different from what we've seen before, and that's exactly what a new Elder Scrolls game needs. So, we've seen that the Daedric Princes have been meddling in Tamriel since the most ancient times, all the way through to the 4th era, where the last Elder Scrolls game takes place. These interventions have had a massive impact on the mortal world, shaping history, politics, and even the very nature of reality. Sometimes their actions come from the nature of their own realms, other times from boredom, or a thirst for domination. And since these forces have always been part of the world, there's really no reason to think we won't be crossing paths with the Daedra again in Elder Scrolls 6. What role they'll play in the main story, though, that's still one of the biggest mysteries. If there's one thing the past has taught us, it's that mortals have to stay alert. Understanding the Daedric Princes, their nature, their motivations, and knowing when to form unexpected alliances might be key to survival. Because no matter how many times they've been defeated, Daedric influence never truly goes away. It just takes on new forms. Who knows? Maybe in the next game we'll even see an alliance between elves and men against a new threat. That would definitely throw off all the people expecting a second Great War. And honestly, if the story's done right, it could be something truly unique. In this video, I've tried to create something that's both a deep dive into Daedra lore and a space to explore what might be coming in Elder Scrolls 6. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. And just to mention, while a lot of the in-game info comes from my own time playing, I also leaned heavily on the unofficial Elder Scrolls page's website for lore and written texts. If you're into the Elder Scrolls universe and want to read up more, I highly recommend checking it out. And of course, huge thanks to everyone who contributes to that amazing resource. Before we wrap things up, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about a possible Daedric crisis in Elder Scrolls 6? Which prince do you think might be behind it? Drop your theories and ideas down in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.